But again, this turn to Iran, to interventionism, to me feels like the biggest betrayal of a political movement I've ever seen in my life.
And it's really interesting to me how it split the conservative right.
Yeah.
Pretty.
Okay, so I need you to stop whatever you're doing right now, because what you're about to watch is one of those moments that you genuinely cannot find anywhere else on television. Tim Dillon built his entire career on a MAGA podcast. J.D. Vance sat on that podcast just days before the presidential election and explained how a war in Iran would benefit Israel but not America. And now Tim Dillon is sitting across from Piers Morgan calling MAGA the biggest con in history. What he says about Trump, about Iran, and about the Republican Party in the next few minutes is something that should make every single person watching stop and think. Keep watching.
From when he was, doing The Apprentice, I was on it, won it with him, to then becoming a politician, then winning that 2016 election, then
I think
coming out and then winning again.
I think there's the mass migration of people from one place to another is the biggest issue of our time. Whether people want to admit it or not, not everybody talks about it in an eloquent way, but it is the biggest issue of our time. How to assimilate people into an existing economic, political, cultural sphere is very difficult. Trump came out and talked about that issue, and again, in a way that offended a lot of people and drove a lot of people crazy. It's a big issue in the UK. Farage is about to potentially win with this issue, right? So he came out, and to me it was very interesting because the working class in the United States, and I think the working class here, feels like they've fallen behind tremendously.
Yeah.
And if you look at cities like London and New York, a lot of people are buying property that don't even live there. It's a boon for luxury real estate. It's a boon for finance. But really, people that, are, British born, of all races, of all religions, but have called this country home forever, feel like they're losing ground. That was happening in the United States. Trump gave a voice to that, which no one else had. He also gave a voice to this idea that going around the world and wasting money on pointless, unwinnable, largely Middle Eastern wars was bankrupting America, saddling our children with debt. These were his two main salient points.
Have you voted for him at all?
I didn't vote in the last. No, I didn't vote.
You didn't first time
I was in Texas doing a podcast with Joe Rogan, and I'm registered in New York, so I was there election day. In New York, your vote doesn't really matter.
Would you have voted for him?
Probably, yeah. I think certainly the last time. I think Kamala Harris and Biden were a disaster. I believe that.
Okay, stop right there, because what Tim just said is something that almost no one who spent years on MAGA-adjacent media will say out loud. He is not a liberal. He is not an anti-Trump commentator doing the expected thing. He actually believed in what Trump was selling. And that is exactly what makes this so significant. When someone who was inside the movement tells you it was a con, that is a completely different thing from an outsider saying it. And the specific point he makes about Netanyahu, that Trump was convinced to enter this war without a plan, matches almost exactly what the New York Times reported. Nobody pushed back on that. Watch what comes next.
I think you've been sold a story, a comfortable lie, in which being progressive means never questioning the dominant institutional line, and it's a line in which compassion is equated with compliance. But real compassion asks hard questions. Real advocacy protects the people it claims to represent, even when that's inconvenient. Real activism doesn't silence lesbians, medicalise children, or tell a little boy who plays with dolls that actually he's a girl. There's no serious activism happening in these institutions, as I've unpacked. There's ideological enforcement, language policing, nasty online abuse, regressive demands dressed up as virtue, and there are children very likely to grow up same-sex attracted, questioning vulnerable children who are paying the price for our collective reluctance to say so. It's not bigotry to notice. I don't care what you say to me. It's not cruelty to object to it. It's not backwards to ask who exactly modern LGBTQ+ activism is for. Be brave. Let yourself question the narrative that you're being fed. Don't tell me to be kind if being kind involves lying to and medicalising kids, betraying lesbian and gay people, rolling back women's hard-fought-for rights, and hurling threat at those who object. Again, hatred, you talk about it. Try being a woman who knows what one of those are. I'll tell you about hatred. No, I don't subscribe to this kindness, and I'll tell the truth instead.
Well, Mate Flanagan joins me now. First of all, absolutely brilliant.
Thanks.
That was badass. Were you surprised about the reaction when it blew up online?
I think to an extent, yeah, because, you know, I think we all know that this debate, such as it is, has been going on for a really, really long time. And there have been some really amazing men, women, organisations that they've set up and are part of that have been saying the kind of things that I said in that speech on Thursday at the Union. I think I'm really pleased that it was sort of picked up online, because I think it's important to see that young people, students especially, are saying this, because a lot of the time people are pretty, they're worried about the state of our higher education institutions. They're worried about our young people, especially women, because we know that there are a lot of women who are pushing left, politically speaking. I'd say some of them quite radically. So the fact that there's a young woman, saying, pointing out what the problem is here and saying, this is what I believe, and normalising it being said. So I'm pleased that it was picked up online.
In your speech, you also talked about the abuse you've received campaigning for women's rights. You talked about being shouted at in the street, dubbed a fascist, spat at, insulted for how you look, even receiving rape and death threats online. What's happened since your speech went viral? Has that got worse? Have you had, on the converse, a lot of people coming to support you? How have you found the reaction?
The reaction has been overwhelmingly positive, extremely positive. And some of that has come from, people who, have been part of this for a very long time, have followed the gender debate, again, for quite a long time. But there are a lot of people who have sent me messages and stuff saying, I've never really heard about this, and now hearing you say that, I think one person told me it's made her wake up. And that's something that I'm really pleased about, the fact that it broke out of the barriers just surrounding the debate to people who maybe either didn't know or didn't quite understand what was going on before through no fault of their own. It's a murky debate to get involved in.
It's funny you use the phrase wake up, because I wrote a book called Wake Up 4 years ago, warning about a number of things, but in particular what was potentially going to happen on campuses. And then I wrote one called Woke is Dead last year. And I made the point, I don't think it's actually over, but I feel like the worm is turning. And when I watched your speech and when I saw the reaction to it, I did feel, well, that's what I'm talking about. People are no longer prepared to just accept the status quo is going to be all this, frankly, this bullshit. They're going to stand up. They're going to use facts as their main weapon. And they're going to say, actually, I'm entitled to my opinion as much as you are to yours. And that's why I loved what you did and why I felt it was so courageous. What was the reaction from fellow students?
So, again, there are a lot of students. I mean, immediately after the debate in the union, some students came up to me and said that they agreed and thanked me for saying it, thanked me for saying what they themselves know to be true, but as you said, is scary to declare publicly. There have been some other students, including those who were in the chamber, one of whom was speaking in opposition, so speaking against me, who were very frustrated by the fact that somebody decided to stand up and say it and to normalise it. But as I say, overwhelmingly, the reaction has been really, really positive.
Well, I think you're talking about Dr. Helen Weberly, who was on the opposite side of the debate. And she's actually used the phrase that blood would be dripping down the hands of those who disagreed with her.
For the last decade, I have worked exclusively with transgender people. And I am a very, very proud modern-day activist. I would like to apologise to any transgender person who is in this room or who may be listening on social media later. Gender identity is something innate within you. It is not something that is a disorder. If your gender identity is different to the sex that you were assigned at birth, there is nothing wrong with you. It is not a disorder. It is not a mental illness, and you are not broken. I most strongly oppose the motion that's been proposed tonight, and I feel that anybody who does agree and go along and approve that motion will, and raise their hands to that, will have blood dripping down their hands in years to come.
I mean, extraordinary words from her there. And also weaponising this thing that if you don't agree with her and her view, intransigent view of this, obviously you're transphobic, you hate trans people.
Well, look, in the speech, I said that these days, especially among the young and especially among young women, I'll say again, compassion is equated with compliance. So go along with this, or you are a bad person, you're unkind. Firstly, I'd just like to say I don't think it's kind to lie to children. I don't think it's kind to lie to anyone that you can change your sex. I don't think it's kind to the women who suffer directly as a result, i.e. having their single-sex spaces invaded by men. I don't think it's kind to LGBT people. I unpacked all of this in the speech. What I would say, though, is that Helen Weberly is fundamentally untrustworthy within this debate because she profits off of the transing of kids. So the fact of the matter is, the more kids that are trans, the more money she makes. That is the simple fact. So she stands to gain from peddling this ideology, and it is an ideology. It is not factual to claim that this nebulous idea of gender identity is somehow innate. It simply isn't. The science and also the law follow the reality that there are two sexes, there are male and female, and you can talk about chromosomes, you can talk about everything. Everybody knows that there are two sexes, and everybody knows that that matters, but people have been scared into silence, especially in institutions, and that has rippled out so destructively in society, in healthcare services, in schools, again, in the LGBT community. It is damaging things when you start peddling a lie as truth and then trying to obliterate somebody who goes against it by calling them immoral. It's an extremely dangerous thing to be doing. I do not trust her.
No, I completely.
Now, this is the moment that made my jaw drop. Tim Dillon says something that is almost impossible to walk back. He was talked into a war without a plan. The Israelis oversold it. He thought it would be like Venezuela. And Piers doesn't challenge it. He agrees, he starts building on it. That is not a debate. That is two people, one of whom spent years in MAGA media, sitting in London quietly agreeing that the President of the United States was convinced to enter a war he did not fully understand. And nobody on that panel had a counter-argument. Not one.